Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Perez. Please welcome.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for coming.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Buffalo Bills. I don't think we're here to talk about football, but why your affinity for the Buffalo Bills?
I grew up in Buffalo. I'm a Buffalo-Minican. My parents got to Buffalo because of the similarities in the weather between DR and Buffalo. Actually, they had to leave the Dominican Republic because there was a pretty bad dictator there. And my father went into the U.S. Army, served as a legal immigrant. And so when he got out, he was stationed in Atlanta, Georgia. And by then, 3 of the 5 of us were born. He got a job at the VA hospital in Buffalo, and that's where he moved. And so my sister and I were born there. And so I'm the caboose of 5, and they settled there. And Buffalo's a great town. We were the Dominican Chamber of Commerce as a kid. There were 3 Dominican families, actually. Yeah. Now there are many more, but at the time, there were just the 3 families.
Yeah, I think a lot of Hispanics here in the United States have similar stories. I grew up in Mexico, and then we emigrated to Toronto. And we were one of 3 Mexican families in Toronto. Right. I remember watching the news. The only American news we would get in Canada would be the Buffalo news. And whenever it would snow an inch in Toronto, it would snow 10 feet in Buffalo. Yeah. So I felt for the poor Dominicans who were freezing out there.
It's a great place to grow up.
If you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about your family background. Mm-hmm. You mentioned your family's from the Dominican Republic. I believe your grandfather was involved in politics.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that story?
My grandfather was in the diplomatic service there, starting in the early 1920s. And then when Trujillo came to power in around the early 30s, he became the ambassador to the United States. And then in 1935, at first, Trujillo was trained by the United States. So when he came to power, there was a hope that maybe some of that training would provide him with a sense of values, and it turned out not to be the case. So by 35, my grandfather spoke out. He was removed from his job, and then in 37, after the massacre of the Haitians, he'd already been removed from his job, but then he was kind of formally declared non grata by Trujillo. So my family moved to New York City. Mm-hmm. My mom lived most of her life in the States, even though she was born in Santo Domingo. But so it was basically the height of the Depression, and my mom was the second youngest of 9, and they were in the States, and that's how our love for this country came about, because this country gave my family opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so it was, they grew up in Mecca for most Dominicans, is Washington Heights. So that's where they grew up. My father left as well because he was part of sort of a student movement, for lack of a better term. And so he left the Dominican Republic, and they got married, and settled ultimately in Buffalo, as I described. And so you learn a lot of lessons from that, including, make sure the ladder's down for others.
What was it like being one of 3 Dominican families in Buffalo? Was there a big Hispanic community, or is it essentially the 3?
No,
Dominican
there was not a large community at all when I was growing up. I was actually back there in Buffalo 8 or 9 months ago doing some work on a weekend, and I was at a restaurant at an event, and it was just remarkable how the community has grown. Not just the Dominican community, but the Latino community. A lot of Puerto Ricans, more Dominicans, and frankly, it's very affordable to live in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And so you look at places like Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is about maybe 3 hours from New York City, and you see this immense Puerto Rican and Dominican community, and basically they were folks who settled in New York, got priced out of the New York market. You can have a $14, $15 an hour job in that community and own a home and live a really solid middle-class life. So you see in these communities that have sprouted up. Reading, Pennsylvania is 70% Latino. I mean, it's remarkable how immigration patterns have transformed communities, urban, suburban, and rural, across the country, and Buffalo is no different. So,
Right.
I mean, I no longer need my hands. I need much more than my hands to count the number of Latino families in Western New York.
Now, it's obviously not a job description to be of Hispanic heritage to be the Secretary of Labor, but what do you think your background, how your family came here to the United States, how has that influenced you in terms of your thinking about your job as a Secretary of Labor with the definition that I had of America's livelihood?
Well, my parents taught all five of us that to whom much is given, much is expected. And so actually all of my siblings are doctors, and I'm the black sheep of the family, and I had to promise never to be a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer. And I kept that promise. And what I love about my job is that it really is consistent with the values that I was taught, which are the values of making sure there's a level playing field for everyone. And the thing I love about my job at the Department of Labor is we help people at scale. I've worked with so many different businesses who understand that when workers succeed and businesses succeed, we all succeed. There's this, I've been very involved in this conscious capitalism movement, which is really a movement of a lot of business leaders who understand that when you have a stakeholder model of governance, in other words, shareholders are best served when all stakeholders are well served. It's not I either take care of my workers, or I take care of my customer, or I take care of my shareholder, or I take care of my supply chain. You can create a virtuous cycle, and there are so many employers who are doing that. And I spend a lot of time with them, and we spend a lot of time bringing together people who work to ensure that workers have a voice, with employers who understand that when workers have a voice, that's good for workers, good for business, good for communities. So it's been a remarkably fun job. I feel like I'm getting an MBA on the job.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's exciting.
I think the question of who is a shareholder has come up many times during this election. Are illegal immigrants considered a shareholder in this economy or not? How do you view that? How do you view the obviously what's the discussion that's happening during the campaign, but more specifically, who do you represent as Secretary of Labor? Who are your shareholders?
Well, we enforce a number of laws that are really at the heart of what it means to be a worker in America and what it means to be middle class in America. The Fair Labor Standards Act, for instance, was, in the words of FDR, the second most important piece of legislation after the Social Security Act ever passed to help workers. And the Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't say you have to help all Americans. The Fair Labor Standards Act says if you worked 8 hours, you should be paid for 8 hours. At the Civil Rights Division, where I was before the Department of Labor, we enforced a number of laws. If you were the victim of a hate crime, or if you were the victim of an act of police misconduct, it didn't matter what your citizenship or immigration status was. And that's because that really fundamentally reflects the values of who we are as a nation. We're having a serious conversation right now about whether e pluribus unum still has meaning in our country. I think our diversity is our greatest strength as a nation. Our diversity is what has made us a great nation. And our immigrants enrich our nation. When I was the Maryland Labor Secretary, we commissioned a study to document the contributions that foreign-born Marylanders make. And foreign-born Marylanders are more likely in Maryland to have a college degree than native-born Marylanders. And our health profession in Maryland, and frankly across America, would be in much worse shape but for the contributions of immigrants who are working in the health profession. So I believe that our immigrant history is such a remarkable part of the American fabric. And and this isn't the first time in our nation's history that we've had this debate. Those of you who've studied the Know Nothing movement, that was an anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic movement. And that movement faded because of the same reason that these movements today will fade. It's because the collective power of we came together and folks were able to summon our better angels. And I'm confident. I have chronic optimism because I see workers and businesses and other stakeholders working together day in and day out, understanding that we all succeed only when we all succeed.
Right. Well, I'm going to continue asking a few questions, but we'll leave time for any questions. If you feel just impassioned that you really want to interrupt and ask a question now, please lift your hands, and obviously we'll be able to answer. Just going back again to your history, how did you end up in civil rights and a civil rights attorney? What led you to that field?
Well, I wanted to change the world. I looked around and I was looking at who were some of the change agents around, and they seemed to be a lot of people involved in the civil rights space. And I have a portrait in my office, a picture of myself with John Lewis, who's one of my heroes, along with another photo with myself and Senator Kennedy, for whom I worked. And these were folks who understood what Hubert Humphrey once said when he said that the moral test of our strength as a nation is how we treat those in the dawn of life, our children, how we treat those in the twilight of life, our seniors, and how we treat those in the shadows of life. And I've derived incredible fulfillment from a career in which we've been able to expand opportunity, and both economic opportunity and opportunity to participate in the democratic process. And we have to fortify our infrastructure of economic opportunity, and we have to fortify our infrastructure of democracy. So I feel, no disrespect to Lou Gehrig, I feel kind of like the luckiest person on the face of the earth because I've had these opportunities, both in local, federal, state government, to help people at scale.
Right. The National Hispanic Heritage Month, I guess, was originally the National Hispanic Heritage Week, enacted during the time of Lyndon Johnson, then got expanded to a month during Reagan. When do you think it's going to be the National Hispanic Heritage Year? When is that legislation going to pass?
Well, I've said a number of times, we need to make every day Martin Luther King Day.
Yeah.
And, I'm always ambivalent about celebrating months, but I do think it's great to call attention to the remarkable contributions of Latinos. I'm going to be hosting an event this week at the Department of Labor, very similar to this, with the president of the United Farm Workers, Arturo Rodriguez, whose father-in-law was Cesar Chavez. And so we're using that as an opportunity to talk about where we've been, where we've come, and where we need to go.
Right.
And I think these moments are good reflections, and to look at the remarkable contributions of Latinos, and to hold events so that other people who are out there wondering, is Google a place that I can aspire to, or is the Department of Labor a place I can aspire to? Sandra Day O'Connor once said in a very important opinion on affirmative action, people across the country need to see that pathways to leadership are visibly available. And if they don't see people who look like them, then those pathways don't look very visible. So I think months like this are pretty important.
I agree. We had every Thursday, it's called TGIF. Thank God I guess it should be called Thursday, but thank God it's Friday.
To get to
Friday. A celebration of Hispanics at Google. And one of the feedback that we got from Googlers all around was actually it was great to even just talk about it, because it gave Hispanics within Google a feeling that they could belong and they could actually be part of a community. How important is that to you in your role as a Hispanic, as a very prominent Hispanic in the Obama administration? Does that carry a lot of burden for you as a role model? How does that impact you?
No, I don't see it as a burden at all. I see it as a privilege and a responsibility. So this Thursday, when we're doing this event at the Department of Labor, we're going to have roughly 40 students from my son's high school. They're all Latino students, and they're all living in some economically challenging circumstances. And one of the things I've observed in the course of the work that I've done is that a lot of people who haven't had the good fortune that I've had, one of the things that they lack is mentors. Some people call it social capital. People older than 50 call it a Rolodex. People like you all don't know what a Rolodex is. If you want to be a nurse but you've never met someone who's a nurse, it's hard to carry that aspiration.
Yeah.
And so we're bringing these students so that they can see what the Department of Labor is, so that they can meet an iconic figure like Artie. And then afterward, we can talk about some of the other opportunities that exist. For instance, we run the Job Corps, which is, the Job Corps is, we celebrated our 50th anniversary a couple of years ago. It's a Great Society program that has helped literally tens of thousands of people who, whose life path was not linear, but who have as much talent as folks who follow the linear path that help them to get access to opportunity. And so the more you can do that, then the greater the likelihood that folks who have talent can harness that talent.
And again, any questions, please line up at the microphone. I'm curious, in your view, how important is technology for Hispanics in the U.S.? You talked about education and getting access to education. Where does technology fit into all of it?
Oh, enormous. I mean, we were just talking, and I recall one of the slides that said that Latinos are something like 3 times more likely to have a smartphone. Is that the right data point? And I see that. I mean, and we have 5.9 million job openings right now across America, which is the highest number we've had since we've been keeping this data series. And about 1/10 of those job openings are in the IT space. And a substantial subset of those don't require a college degree. So, when I talk about IT, sometimes people's first reaction is, well, I don't have time to get a PhD. And the response is, you don't need a PhD.
Yeah.
And we've made a lot of investments and formed a lot of partnerships with public school systems to translate that fluency that a lot of young people, including but not limited to young Latinos, have with their gadgets, and translate that into a pipeline to a middle-class job. And so it's really exciting to go and see these coding camps and other things that are available. So, I mean, technology, and I wouldn't limit it to Latinos. I mean, that if you're not tech savvy, you're just not going to succeed in the 21st century economy. And we still have this digital divide. And so we have more work to do in that space.
And I agree. I think the incredible access to mobile and mobile telephony and mobile phones and getting cheaper and cheaper is really just opening up the entire world of information and access to education to anybody. I'll ask the first question. You mind introducing yourself?
My question's actually related to...
Do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Jorge, and my question is related to the automation of jobs in America. Specifically, I was looking at an article on Planet Money on NPR that was published last year that said that the most common job across most states was truck driving. And with the advent of self-driving cars, which Google is also developing here, probably all those jobs are going to be automated, so we're going to have self-driving trucks. And then we also have the CEO of Carl's Jr. saying that he's going to replace a lot of the jobs in Carl's Jr. restaurants with automated robots or machines. And for example, my own dad just lost his job recently and was working as an Uber driver, which is probably also going to be a job that's going to get automated away with Uber testing out self-driving cars in Pittsburgh. So how is the Labor Department looking at this automation of jobs and planning ahead to make sure that a lot of people aren't left out in the cold when we have structural changes in the labor market?
Well, it's a great question. And as someone who grew up in Buffalo, New York, I have firsthand knowledge of what happens when you're not prepared. You know, I was a kid when my father passed away, and my surrogate father had 9th or 10th grade education. He was the wisest person I met, and I've actually grown to wonder whether there's an inverse correlation between the number of years you have of education and your wisdom. But that's an aside. He was a Teamster, and he lost his job when the economy tanked in Buffalo. And because he had a lot of talent, but he never had access to opportunity to upskill. So he ended up, you know, pumping gas, working as a security guard, doing anything to make ends meet. And so what I learned from that very personal message of watching them suffer and lose their home and lose their dignity was that we always have to be one step ahead. This is not the first time in our nation's history that the very important question you asked has been asked. And the key is not only to provide people with the skills to succeed today, but with the core competencies to thrive tomorrow. So that today it's the cloud. In a few years, the cloud will become the abacus. And so you want to equip people with the fluency to do IT work at the Department of Labor today with the cloud, but also with that competency to keep moving forward. Learning is lifelong. And you know, the Republic Steel plant, which employed 20,000 people when I was a kid in Buffalo, is being replaced by the largest solar panel manufacturing facility in the Western Hemisphere, a Solar City plant. And that will probably employ, you know, 4,000, something like that, a fraction of what it used to employ. And we've got to make sure, and you'll see, you know, tablets, not you know, folks running around with hammers, because that's the world in which we live. And so I think the key there is to make sure that we are always equipped with the skills that will enable us to thrive. And for some people, thriving will mean entering a new line of work, a steel worker that we helped to retrain and retool, so now he's in advanced manufacturing. And so today's drivers, I still think they have a good glide path ahead of them for a number of years to come, but we will always make sure they're prepared for whatever happens in the next iteration of technological advance.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, Secretary Perez. This is Javier Gonzalez. I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the key moments with President Barack Obama that you've had that you'll be sharing in your memoir once you're...
Well, I don't think I can get enough people to read my memoir, so my memoir is going to stick in my head. It's incredible. It's always helpful. Just like this is sort of a, you know, basic moment, and I don't think it's groundbreaking. It's always nice when you have the smartest person in the room on your side, because we've been in a lot of tense situations, and his command of the issues is remarkable. You know, when I think about my memories with him, I think about really, I think the courage that he's had to do things that have, you know, people, you know, a lot of naysayers. History will judge the Affordable Care Act as one of the most important additions to our social safety net in our nation's history. But, you know, we have a number of challenges now that are born in no small measure from the fact that there has been a relentless campaign of people to make it fail. And governors who are leaving billions of dollars on the table so that they don't give Barack Obama a victory, even though they're hurting literally tens of thousands, if not more, of their constituents. So, you know, I guess number one is just watching him understand that I don't care as much about how I'm judged tomorrow. I will look at this through a long-term prism of history. And I've seen that in the ACA. I've seen it in some work we did enacting an overtime rule I've seen it in work we've done to make sure that people who save for retirement have access to advice that's in their best interest. We take a lot of heat when you do those things, but frankly, I think every day he's motivated, as I am, by how can I strengthen and grow the middle class in America. And I am absolutely, he has a lot more gray hair than he had 8 years ago. I'm jealous because he has hair. So that's for me what I will remember is those individual examples of when we did the right thing. And you can go home to I can go home to my kid and say, hey, we helped 2 million home health workers today get access to a decent standard of living because of a final rule we put in place. That's kind of cool. And it wouldn't happen but for him.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming and taking our questions today, Secretary Perez. So my name is Benjamin Clark. For obvious reasons, much of the focus on the labor market is on helping the unemployed find jobs. However, it is also important to help those currently employed who want a better job find it. This includes those working part-time but want full-time work, those working in positions which don't utilize their training or education, and those simply looking for a higher paid job. Surfing LinkedIn and other job aggregator sites and submitting dozens of resumes isn't a great or scalable approach, especially with 10 million employers in the United States today. So what changes can be made to increase labor market efficiency for these workers, and what role is there for government and technology in doing so?
That's a great question. And about 2 years ago, Congress, in one of the regrettably few pieces of impactful bipartisan legislation, passed a bill called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And it was a modernization of the rules of engagement for our public workforce system. We have 2,500 American job centers around the country. So if you lose your job or you have a job and you want to get a better job, you can go to an American job center free of cost. And we help literally millions of people. These American job centers were basically the nation's emergency room during the Great Recession. And what the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act has done is, among other things, it has placed a focus on not only folks who are out of a job, who want a job, but folks who are looking for incumbent worker opportunities. So you're in the job, but you want the skills for a better job. So a lot of the funding streams that are coming through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, before they were focused more on someone who's looking for a job. Now there's still a focus on that, but there's a lot more flexibility. So in markets, in some markets, really the issue is not getting people in because unemployment is really low, but it is upskilling people because there's a skills mismatch. There's a lot of demand in one area, but we don't have the pipeline. So the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, I think, is a real key indicator. I'm actually going to Glassdoor tomorrow. And part of what we're going to discuss there is really about your question, because the more information people have, the more power they have. And I've really appreciated not only data we get through you, but things that we've been doing with Glassdoor to make the process more transparent. There's still too much opaqueness to the job search process, and you still are flying a little bit blind. You go into somewhere and we need to do more than just Yelp for job seekers. We need to, I think, get more information. And Glassdoor, we have data that we collect. Glassdoor is a great data aggregator, and so we're trying to figure out what else we can do because the market is shifting from what it was before.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Secretary Perez. Bienvenido a Google.
Gracias.
My name is Alberto, and I'm an engineer here at Google. My question is, lately there's been a lot of focus and narrative around bringing jobs back, specifically manufacturing jobs. So given that the U.S. economy is actually greatly services-based, why is the focus and the narrative around manufacturing jobs? Shouldn't it be around services? And if so, what are the initiatives that the administration is doing to amplify and increase the availability of jobs in the service industry or sector?
Well, actually, it's not an either or. And when you look at what we're doing, it's really both and then some. And the emphasis on manufacturing is a function of the fact that manufacturing has great multiplier opportunities. When you create a manufacturing job, I own a Ford Escape, and it was built in Louisville, Kentucky. And now that they were 800 employees in the depths of the Great Recession. They're up to over 4,000 now. And that doesn't include their supply chain. And so when you create good manufacturing jobs, you're able to have that very remarkable multiplier effect. And also give opportunity in relationship to another question. Folks who've lost their job at the steel mill, they're incredibly capable of working in an advanced manufacturing context. And what we're seeing from our outreach to businesses is that the reason why businesses are bullish about making things in America is, number one, we're the best consumer in the world right now, and our economy is better than basically everybody else. And number two, there's IT stability in the United States. You make things in China, and you employ a lot of lawyers who are dealing with IT issues and intellectual property issues of that nature. And I talk to a lot of businesses who talk a lot about cubed footage. So if you're making big things overseas, it costs a lot to ship them home. I spent a lot of time here during the ports dispute that really tied up the West Coast port system, and the president sent me here to try to resolve that. And I learned a lot about why more and more folks who make things overseas are thinking about making them here at home. And you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is one of the trade agreements that has been the focus of a lot of discussion and debate. And trade agreements always are the focus of discussion and debate. And there are entire chapters on the services industry, because there's a recognition that in our global economy, we don't simply make products like airplanes for exports. The service sector is a remarkable set of opportunities, and of which you've already availed yourself of. But as the president has outlined, a properly done trade agreement can even open up even more doors. So we're doing both and then some, is I think the upshot.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Secretary Perez. My name is Ana Diaz Hernandez. I work at Udacity, which is an online education company, and I work on workforce development partnerships as well as employer partnerships. So I help our students get jobs after they take our courses. And so my question is really aligned on, so part of our strategy is that we work with companies to create courses that are relevant for the workforce so that people can take the course and get a job. And sometimes those companies even help fund scholarships so that the students out there in the workforce can take them and then aspire to get a job in that sector. And so my question to you would be, where do you think companies could take some leadership around funding courses where there's a current market gap, where there aren't enough people trained to do something, and they could really be thinking 1, 2, 5 years ahead and start training people right away?
We're starting to see, I think, a very promising evolution in that space. I mean, we do a lot of work in this space. We have an entire office of workforce development that is all about the work that you're describing. And the old model of HR I describe as the cannibalism model of HR. You've got talent here, so I'll cherry pick your talent, and then you cherry pick my talent, and that's zero-sum HR. What we're seeing now in today's paradigm, which is very exciting, is that sectors are coming together, recognizing that we've got to grow the pie. We've got to create a virtuous cycle. And the way we do that is through aggregating our collective wisdom, coming together around working with people who train, so community colleges and colleges. And you go to, I spend a lot of time with community colleges, and the reason why they're having so much success is because they have business representation in their department. So when you're taking a course, you're getting a degree, you're getting a certificate, that business has a lot more confidence that that degree has the requisite competencies to thrive in my company because I helped create it. And I've talked to a lot of business owners who are kind of a little bit ripped, frankly, at four-year higher ed, because I'm getting these people who have a computer science degree, but then they come in and they don't really have a lot of the basics. I've heard this in the sciences. You know, people who have a degree, but they don't know how to work in a lab because they never had the practical experience. So I think what we're seeing now through what we call sector strategies, where we get an IT sector and we understand what are your needs projected forward, and how do we do a better job of working with our institutions so that they are producing that pipeline of folks that don't simply have the degree, but they have the core competencies that come with that degree that are necessary. And that's, to me, what's exciting about today's, I call it the, you know, we're constructing a skills superhighway. And we need new and different on-ramps. You know, we're doing a lot in the world of apprenticeship. When you think of an apprentice, you think of a plumber and a carpenter. And apprenticeship has obvious application there. But if you go to Europe, which I have done, you will see 18 and 19-year-olds and 16 and 17-year-old apprentices who are going to be tomorrow's CEOs. The CEO, the most recent CEO of Zurich Insurance, you know, Fortune 500 company, started out as an apprentice. So we're trying to build these new on-ramps and off-ramps that address exactly what you're doing, because the good news, we have a great problem, but it is a problem, which is that businesses are bullish. They want to grow their business. And we've got to make sure that the pipeline of folks, especially the pipeline living in communities that have been historically underserved, is ready for that task. I'm confident we can do it, but it does take that much more collaboration at scale. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you, Secretary Perez, for coming. My name is David Moulton. Despite the fact that people have been talking about the gender wage gap for decades, women are still making less money for doing equivalent jobs. So what do you think are the kind of best ways that we as a country can move forward to get to a point where women are making the same money for doing the same things?
That's a great question. I'm looking at your T-shirt, and I'm reflecting on a visit I made to one of my friends in college to Princeton, and it was the first time I had seen an orange squirrel in my life, so I wanted to comment on your T-shirt. But I digress. I think there's a lot. I mean, there's no one quick answer to that. But one thing we've been doing lately, and we were having this conversation today, is pay transparency. You know, when Lilly Ledbetter, the first law that the president signed was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, and she was working at her job in Alabama and doing identical work to men, making less than them, and the way she found out was because someone slipped her an anonymous note.
Yeah.
And
my mother.
You know, you all understand the importance of data. And data shouldn't just be collected and hidden. Data should be collected and made available. So that's one thing. Another thing we need to do is to make sure we have 21st century paid leave and childcare policies. If you compare labor force participation of women in the U.S. and Canada, in the year 2000, it was virtually identical. You look now, Canada's about 8 points higher than we are because they've invested in paid leave and childcare. And so if we had kept pace, we'd have 5.5 million more women in the workplace, 5.5 million more women contributing to the Social Security Trust Fund, the Medicare Trust Fund, and contributing to making, whether it's the Silicon Valley, Wall Street, or Main Street, look more like America. I think those two issues are absolutely huge. And so when you leave the market, you end up coming back and you've fallen behind. And so then you see these gaps exacerbated. So, and then finally, you got to enforce the laws, because I've seen some textbook examples of nuts and bolts discrimination. And so I'm heartened by the fact that more and more employers are understanding, and we're seeing a lot more leadership on this issue, because we're leaving too much talent on the sideline with this, and it just is not. It's not right.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julissa Ramirez, and I am a Dominicana from New York. So happy to have you here. My question is, as you know, the number of STEM jobs, a very small percentage of those are held by Latinos. What is your department doing to increase the number of Latinas and Latinos in STEM jobs in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, that's an all-hands-on-deck enterprise across the administration, working with the Department of Energy, the Department of Education. I was at a convening earlier today with the California Endowment talking about how we increase the pipeline of minority students in the health professions. That's a public health challenge because there's too many underserved communities, and there's a robust body of data showing that healthcare providers of color are more likely to serve communities of color. And so that's why it starts at pre-K. One of the reasons the president has supported dramatic investments in early childhood is because the research is overwhelming. All too many people, by the time they're 3 years old, because of opportunity gaps, they have not heard nearly the number of words that other folks have heard. And so you start out when you're 3 years old and you're already up against the 8 ball. So your question calls for, I think, a very holistic set of investments, starting from pre-K, making sure that the pipeline springs leaks at so many different places. We still have too many schools that are not where they need to be. And we still have too many young kids of color who don't have mentors. And there's a lot of evidence showing that the absence of mentors is a big deal for folks as well. So there's really a soup to nuts, cradle to grave approach that we have to take to this, because we've got a lot more work to do. And it's a public health imperative in the health professions context. It's an economic imperative for all of us. And frankly, it's a moral imperative. Last question.
Last question.
Last question. Okay. Secretary Perez, thank you for being here with us this afternoon. My name is Michael Woolley Osdahl. I'm on Google's transportation team. Climate change is really important to me in being energy independent. I'm curious your thoughts on coal country. My great-grandfather was a coal miner in Pennsylvania. You heard this at the debate yesterday. This ongoing kind of disconnect with the narrative of folks that are in coal country that their livelihood is based on fossil fuels, and our need to become energy independent and invest in clean energy. And there seems to be a disconnect in that narrative with the Democratic Party and folks in coal country and whose livelihood is based on, their labor pool is based on fossil fuels and coal. How do you hope the future administration going forward, whoever's elected, a Democrat or a Republican, how do you hope they approach that narrative of investing in clean energy and climate change with this disconnect with folks that livelihoods are based on fossil fuels and coal?
Well, I hope we can have honest dialogue that is evidence-based. When I hear about the war on coal, one of the biggest forces that has created challenge in coal country is natural gas, but that's not what is discussed. One of my favorite visits in this job, and it really goes to the heart of your question, I was in coal country, Kentucky, Pikeville. And there was a company that we helped to seed called BitSource. And I went to a training program. There were about 15 people there, and what they all had in common is that they were generational coal miners. And as a guy who grew up in Buffalo, I understand Buffalo's manufacturing base wasn't simply a pipeline for jobs, it was part of our identity. Mm-hmm. And when you have generational coal miners and you say, well, sorry, market forces are working against you, that's not simply an economic statement. You're really going at people's identity. But we have realities, and in a lot of the places in Kentucky and West Virginia, the cost of extraction has become very expensive because they've mined out all the easy to mine out stuff. And given our environmental necessities, et cetera, these folks were learning how to code. And the motto of BitSource was from coal to code. And I remember vividly one of the guys who said to me, my company called me last week to offer me a job back at the mine, and I said no, because I feel like I have more of a future here. And another guy said he had a screenshot of his newborn, And he said, you know, when my son gets to be 10 or 12 and he says, you know, Daddy, I can't do this. You know, I got a hard assignment at school. I'm going to tell him, I got out of the coal mine because, you know, I did that. I lost my job. Your grandfather had that job. Your great-grandfather had that job. And I lost my job, and I thought I couldn't do anything else. I'd never turned a computer on in my life, and now I'm coding. You can do anything, son. That's what he's going to say to his son. And if there's one thing I've learned in this job, it is how resilient people are. Because one constant that my father always taught me is change. We are not a static country. You know, today, there are tens of thousands of good middle-class jobs for truck drivers. I don't know where that will be, that world, in 20 or 30 years. If you look at the studies, sometimes the predictions of the impact of automation prove not exactly to bear out as they might. But you always got to prepare for it. And the thing that we have going for us as a nation is that we've got a resilient group of folks. And those folks in coal country, you know, they're now coding. And so what we are doing as an administration, and what we need to continue to do, is to make sure we say to folks, honestly, you know what? Our goal here is to make sure that you can punch your ticket to the middle class. I can't look you in the eye and say it's going to be in a coal mine, because there's a lot of stuff happening out there. But what I can do is look you in the eye and say, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that you have those core competencies to thrive and continue to punch your ticket to the middle class. So it could be the coders, or it can be the guy who came to one of our meetings at the White House, drove all night with his wife, generational coal miner, who's now an EMT. And again, resilient. This is a resilient workforce. This is a resilient country. And when I hear folks badmouth this country and say, you know, the gloom and doom stuff, you just haven't made house calls. Because I've met folks who've been down on their luck through no fault of their own. And what always amazes me is that stick-to-itiveness that they have. And we have to be part of the connective tissue. That's why I love my job, because you know, part of what we do is we're Match.com. You know, we help connect them to, it might be a job in the same industry, or it might be a totally different job. The good news is that employers tell me everywhere I go, I'm bullish about the future. I want to grow my business. And what I need most, Tom, is I need that skilled workforce so I can continue to grow. I'm chronically optimistic as a result of all of these conversations. And we've been able to stay at 5% unemployment. And you look at the rest of the world where they're at, because we've got this resilient workforce, resilient business community, and some great partnerships. Thank you for your question. It's a great way to end this conversation.
Yeah. So the energy with which Mr. Secretary speaks is just infectious. I feel like I should go and learn coding right now. I should.
Me too.
But I think your example of you owning a Ford and the trickle effect that it has of being able to manufacture here in the United States, I think is also an example of you as a Hispanic leader. You know, the fact that you've made it as far as you had in your career, and the impact you've had not only to your family, your community, but everyone who looks up to you, I think is an inspiration for many Hispanics all in the United States and around the world. So on behalf of Google, on behalf of Hola, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And best of luck in this next few months, and obviously in 2017 going forward.
Placer.
Thank you.
Placer.
Muchas gracias.